The rain had soaked the forest floor into a dark sponge when Michael realized the shape by the fallen oak was not a pile of trash or a wounded animal but a woman curled in on herself, breathing like every breath hurt. His flashlight shook in his hand, not from the cold but from the sudden weight of responsibility pressing into his chest, the same weight he had carried alone since his wife died and left him raising a little boy who still asked why heaven took moms but not dads. In that moment, with the woods closing in and the storm roaring like a warning, Michael felt the world testing him again, asking what kind of man he was when no one was watching. He was a single father from rural Pennsylvania, the kind who worked construction by day and collapsed into bed by night, always tired but never done. He had driven out that evening to clear his head, to remember who he was before grief rearranged his life into something smaller and quieter. When he saw her there, soaked through, red dress clinging to a swollen belly, fear and desperation etched across her face, he thought of his son sleeping back home, trusting him to always come back. What if this was your road, your forest, your moment to choose? Would you keep driving, convincing yourself someone else would help, or would you stop and risk being pulled into a stranger's broken story? The woman was heavily pregnant, alone, and clearly abandoned. Her shoes were gone, her feet raw and bleeding, her hands shaking as she tried to push herself upright but failed. Michael noticed the way she kept one arm protectively around her stomach, as if the child inside her was the only reason she was still fighting to stay conscious. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and carried her to his truck, every step reminding him of the night he carried his wife to the car when her breathing stopped being normal, when hope slipped through his fingers like sand. Saving someone else felt terrifying because he knew too well how it felt to fail. The drive to the nearest hospital took nearly an hour, the road slick and empty, the forest stretching endlessly on either side like it wanted to keep what had been left behind. Michael kept checking the rearview mirror, afraid she might fade away in the back seat, afraid the baby might come too soon. He prayed without words, the kind of prayer that rises from fear rather than faith, promising nothing and asking for everything. Somewhere between mile markers and flashing warning lights, he realized how long it had been since he had prayed for anyone other than his son. At the hospital, doctors rushed her away while Michael stood alone in the hallway, soaked, exhausted, and unsure why he stayed. He could have left his name and gone home, but something rooted him there. Maybe it was the memory of how strangers had held his hand the night his wife died, or maybe it was the way the woman's eyes had clung to him in the truck, silently begging him not to disappear. Hours passed, dawn breaking pale through the windows, and when a nurse finally told him the woman and her unborn child were stable, his knees nearly gave out from relief. Her name was Rebecca, and over the next few days Michael learned pieces of her story in fragments, the way broken lives often reveal themselves. She had trusted the wrong man, followed promises that dissolved once her pregnancy became inconvenient, and ended up left miles from anywhere, told she was a mistake better erased than faced. Family had turned their backs, friends had stopped answering calls, and the woods had been her final destination, chosen by someone who wanted to forget she ever existed. If this had happened to you, with no one left to call and a life growing inside you, would you have survived the night? Michael brought her food, checked on her when he could, and eventually told his son, Noah, about the woman he had helped. Noah listened quietly, then asked if the baby would have a dad. The question pierced Michael deeper than any accusation ever could. He had spent years trying to be enough for one child, always afraid he was failing, always wondering if love could stretch without tearing. Watching Rebecca struggle to walk the hospital halls, her future uncertain and fragile, he felt something shift inside him, a slow and painful opening he had kept sealed since loss taught him how dangerous caring could be. When Rebecca was discharged, she had nowhere to go. Michael offered his spare room, telling himself it was temporary, telling himself it was just until she figured things out. The house filled with unfamiliar sounds, the careful steps of a woman learning to trust again, the soft conversations about due dates and doctor appointments, the quiet moments when Rebecca would sit on the porch staring at the trees as if expecting them to betray her again. Healing was not sudden or beautiful, it was slow, awkward, and heavy with setbacks. There were nights she woke screaming, clutching her stomach, convinced she was back in the woods. There were mornings Michael sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, wondering if he had taken on more than he could carry. One evening, weeks before the baby was due, a storm rolled in much like the one that had brought them together. Rebecca found Michael in the garage, sorting through old tools he never used anymore, and she finally told him the truth she had been holding back. She explained that when she thought she was dying in the woods, she had spoken to her unborn child, apologizing for bringing him into a world so cruel, and she had promised that if they survived, she would spend her life proving kindness still existed. She told Michael that when his headlights appeared through the rain, she believed God had sent her a broken man who understood loss because only someone who had lost everything would stop for someone who had nothing. She told him he had not just saved her life, but restored her faith in humanity and in herself. Michael broke down then, the kind of tears that come from years of being strong with no witnesses. No one had ever thanked him for surviving, for staying soft in a hard world, for choosing compassion when bitterness would have been easier. He realized that saving Rebecca had also saved parts of himself he thought were gone forever. In helping her believe she mattered, he remembered that he did too. Before this story ends, pause for a moment and tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were Michael that night, alone on a dark road with a stranger's life in your hands. When the baby was born, healthy and loud and full of life, the hospital room felt brighter than any place Michael had been since his wife's death. Watching Rebecca hold her child, watching Noah gently touch the tiny fingers, Michael understood that families are sometimes built not by blood but by mercy. The woods that once symbolized abandonment became a reminder of second chances, and the men who stopped that night learned that love does not run out when shared, it multiplies. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change more lives than we ever imagine.